I think we left off. It's around line 710, beginning of fit 11. Very briefly, today's Monday. On Wednesday, kind of glossed over Beowulf's battle with Grendel, and I'm not going to say really anything more about it. Grendel leaves the hall, leaving his arm behind. So he's wrenched his arm off because he knows he can't defeat Beowulf. First time he's ever fought anybody that he's actually fearful for his life, so he allows Beowulf essentially to wrench his arm off, and he goes off to his abode dripping gore. And we're told, beginning of fit 12, during this battle, Beowulf's men also want to get involved, okay? I said on Wednesday, Beowulf's the only one who fights Grendel. And Beowulf tells them he'll do that alone, by himself. And I suggested, or paraphrased, summarized, that in this battle, they're throwing each other up against the wall, but they never lose their hand grips. Because if one of them lets go, Grendel's going to flee. So while they're doing that, Beowulf's men get their swords out and they try to play whack-a-mole essentially on Grendel. And we're told, beginning around 794 or so, many in a row in Beowulf's troop drew his blade, longed to protect the life of his liege lord, the famous captain, however they could, meaning in whatever manner. But they didn't know something. Line 803 or so. They didn't know, pick up 801, they did not know that no sword, nor the best iron anywhere in the world could even touch that evil sinner. Why? He had worked a curse on weapons, every sort of blade. Which tells us, Grendel isn't really from around these parts. He has some kind of magical abilities, okay? So as much as they try to harm him, they can't. This also ties in kind of architecturally, so to speak, with the creation of the poem by the poet, because Beowulf initially says he won't do what? He won't use any swords. Okay? So, Beowulf rips his arm off. Grendel realizes he's going to die, and we're told, 8:15 and following, the loathsome creature felt a great pain in his body, a gaping wound opened in his shoulder joint, his sinews sprang apart, his joints burst asunder. Beowulf was given glory in battle. Notice, it's not Beowulf achieves, Beowulf gets, Beowulf performs. This is a gift to Beowulf, okay? So, Grendel knows his end of life has come, and he flees and goes off to his home. Fit 13. Then in the morning was many a warrior, as I have heard, around that gift hall. And we get that phrase, I'm not going to spend hardly any time on this. We get that phrase, as I have heard, several times throughout the poem. The speaker of the poem, you have to imagine this is, okay, put yourself back in Cadman's monastery. The harp is going around, the beer is going around, everybody has to take a turn singing a song. But this kind of song is not sung by a whole group of people where each one takes a portion, etc. This is the kind that a professional storyteller does. And would take several hours. Or they might do part one night, part another night, part another night, okay? There's been a couple places where this has been done from beginning to end, and it does take several hours, okay? I don't think anybody who knows all of Beowulf by heart. There is a guy, name just sounds like Bob Dylan, who used to do this with a harp, did it at Carnegie Hall and other stuff. There's a recording of him, and I can't remember his name. But he doesn't do it all. He doesn't do the whole poem, okay, just parts of it. So, Grendel goes off, morning comes, people arrive, They see Beowulf alive. All but one of his men are alive. And they celebrate Beowulf. But they follow the track left by the blood and gore, trailing after Grendel, fit 13. And we're told his parting from life, 841, hardly seems sad to any man who examined the trail of that inglorious one, how he went on his weary way, defeated by force, to a pool of sea monsters, doomed, put to flight, and left a fatal trail. Okay? The water, so they make their way to this pool, this pond, and the water is bubbling up like a natural spring. But this is bubbling up blood and gore. Okay? And we're told, okay, this is the speaker of the poem to his Anglo-Saxon audience. This isn't a character within the world of the poem speaking, right? So the speaker says, the Shope says, it concealed that doom when, deprived of joys, he lay down his life in his lair in the fen, his heathen soul, and hell took him. Okay? It's kind of interesting. The speaker of the poem, the Shope, saying that, and that's probably the Christian idea of hell being discussed. When Beowulf or another character within the world of the poem speaks, they're probably talking about the Germanic conception of hell. It's not a place of damnation. It's not a place of judgment. It's just where you go when you die. Period. Okay? Unless you're one of the lucky ones who goes off to Valhalla, essentially. The reason I'm emphasizing that the poet here says hell took him, later on we're going to hear Beowulf, and Beowulf's essentially going to say he went to where he will await God's judgment. Not consigning him to hell, oddly enough. Okay? So, we're told, so all these people ride off to where Grendel went into the water and they assume died. Now they start making their way back. And we hear a story told. So story within a story. Lots of stories within the story. So the old retainers, 853, then the old retainers returned from there, and many youth, hold on 1 second, I gotta do something, because they ride their horses back, and they celebrate Beowulf's glory. All right? It was often said that south or north between the two seas, across the wide world, there was none better under the broad billowing sky among shield warriors, nor more worthy to rule. Let's just stop there before we get to the next line. So what have these old warriors said about Beowulf? No one more worthy than him.
Worthy for what?
To rule? No greater warrior? I mean, he killed Grendel, right? Grendel's been there. We don't know yet how. Do we know yet? Have we been told how many years?
Yeah.
It's 12 years, yeah. So he's been coming for 12 years. The best supposedly have tried. Okay? None more worthy, we're told. Nor more worthy to rule. Though they found no fault with their own friendly lord, gracious Hrothgar, but said, "Ach," this is the Old English, "that was good king, but he was a good king." So they're celebrating, praising Beowulf to the highest heavens, and then what? Oops, we forgot about our king. He's a good king. How would you undercut someone's praise? What next word would you use?
But.
To. After he was a good king. But he was a good king. That you could either use the but before or to afterwards. Okay? So what does that tell us, at least in their minds, about Hrothgar? A little bit at least.
Kind of losing their favor.
Yeah, he's not quite as up to snuff as Beowulf is.
Kind of makes sense.
Of course, he hasn't been able to solve the Grendel problem, and Beowulf does in one night by himself. Okay? Remember what Beowulf said in his response to Unferth? I'm going to show you what Geats can do compared to Danes. Okay? And one Geat does it. All right? So, at times the proud warriors let their horses prance, that is, let them gallop, etc. At times the king's thane, full of grand stories, mindful of songs, who remembered much, a great many of the old tales, found other words truly bound together. I don't think that's quite accurate. What the poet is saying is the king's thane, this is the king's storyteller, the king's official kind of like, biographer, history teller. This may be Unferth. I don't think anybody's ever suggested that in print. But Unferth is the one who sits at his feet, is the one who challenges newcomers, is the one who many critics have suggested is a thula, that word from Old Norse that suggests the one who remembers the history and recites it and tells it. Okay? Maybe Unferth, may not be. But this is the person who, the words say, found other words truly bound together. That means this person, as they're writing back, in his mind, binds words together and does what? Tells a story. Talking about composing on the fly. Okay? Here's a little not good example. It's the only thing I can think of. Get on YouTube and watch Robin Williams do improv. Or even better, there's a couple of clips of watch Robin Williams in essence, his comedic genius father/grandfather, Jonathan Winters, together. Jonathan Winters. Jonathan Winters was a major comedian, late 50s, early 20s, went off to a loony bin. I mean, he was literally committed to an insane asylum because they thought he was crazy. He wasn't crazy, he's just comedic genius. When those two get rolling, there's just no stopping them because their minds are able to go faster than their tongues. And they just, that's what this poet, the person being talked about, is doing. As they're writing, he's going through all the words he has in his mind, and not just individual words, but also what are called formulaic phrases. Okay? These are phrases of words that they know they can patch into places in order to fit the meter, in order to fit the alliteration, things like that. Okay? For example, I'm going to give you an example from Greek, from the Odyssey. You have a phrase that shows up repeatedly in the Odyssey: the wine dark sea, Athena of the gray eyes, or gray-eyed Athena. Those are formulas that can just be patched in whenever you need to fit a meter or to fit alliteration or rhyme sometimes, things like that. So that's what this person's doing. And notice what he does. So, this king's thane, mindful of songs, who remembered much, a great many of the old tales, found other words truly bound together. He began again to recite with skill the adventure of Beowulf, adeptly tell an apt tale. That is, he tells us the adventure of Beowulf killing Grendel. We don't hear that tale. He's telling it to the writers, but we don't get a record of it. We don't have somebody transcribing it. Okay? But he goes on. The Shope relating this entire tale to his Anglo-Saxon audience, says, he told nearly all that he had heard said of Siegmund's stirring deeds. Okay? So he doesn't just recount Beowulf's defeat of Grendel. He goes back to a much older Germanic hero, a guy named Siegmund, who killed a dragon. Right? This is one of the greatest heroes in Germanic literature. He told nearly all that he had heard said of Siegmund's stirring deeds, many strange things, the Volsung's strife, his distant voyages, etc., etc., and then mentions Fitela. And the poet says, uncle to nephew, Siegmund, uncle to Fitela. Now, Liuza tells you in his footnote, it's not quite accurate. Actually, he says, Fitela is actually Siegmund's son by his own sister. But what does that also mean? Fitela is his nephew, so there's nothing wrong about it, okay? This story is well known. It's called the Volsunga Saga, if you want to look it up. It's available in a Penguin paperback. The Volsunga Saga, okay? The reason why he tells this is because Siegmund kills a dragon, right? They were companions at need, a great many of the race of giants they slaughtered with their swords, that is Siegmund and Fitela. What have we already been told about Beowulf? By Beowulf. He slew a tribe of giants. So there's another comparison between Beowulf and Siegmund, okay? For Siegmund no small fame grew after his final day, that is, after he died, his fame and reputation increased, okay? After that hardened soldier, Prince's son, had killed a dragon. It's like, that's the greatest thing he did. Why is the poet mentioning it? It's foreshadowing. Because Beowulf's going to kill a dragon. This is telling those of us who think this poem is a unified, unitary whole, that it's not a collection of separate tales that have been cobbled together. This tells us this poet is already thinking, I know how Beowulf's going to die. He's going to die the greatest way a Germanic warrior should die, fighting an inhuman, almost supernatural type being, okay? Grendel's kind of inhuman, but he is human. Long descended from Cain, remember? So, he goes on. He had killed a dragon, keeper of a hoard, alone. He dared to go under gray stones, a bold deed, nor was Fitela by his side. And this is an allusion to how Siegmund, in the Volsunga Saga, actually does kill this dragon. He goes in a trench, like a crevasse in the ground. The dragon's name is Fafnir. The dragon, I might be confusing the Volsunga Saga with the Fafnirthsmal, another Old Norse thing. The dragon crawls over him, and he takes that sword and he stabs into the dragon. But when he stabs into the dragon, he sticks the sword in the side of the wall, okay, or into the wall that the dragon is kind of slithering by. I think this is really important because we're going to see around line 1557, Beowulf's going to find a big old giant sword stuck in a wall.
Is that supposed to tie it together?
I think it does. I don't think any critic, literally, in the 200 years that this poem has been studied, I don't think any critic has ever connected the two of them. And it may be just because I'm totally crazy and a loony. So, it stood fixed in the wall, the manly iron, the dragon met his death. Cool. Okay? That serpent melted in its own heat. Then the poet does this. To show, singing the entire poem of Beowulf, not the poet within the poem riding on the horses with the others. He was the most famous of exiles far and wide among all people, protector of warriors. For his noble deeds he had prospered for them since the struggles of Hermod had ceased, his might and valor. Who is the he? Is it Beowulf? Is it Siegmund, who's been referred to? Since Hermod had ceased. And we get the first reference, I think there are two, to Hermod. Okay? Hermod is the example. Let me rephrase that. He is the exemplar of the bad king. Okay, and we're going to be told why. Among the Jutes, he was betrayed into his enemy's hands, quickly dispatched. Now, the he there refers to Hermod. So, Hermod was, we're told, betrayed into his enemy's hands. If he was betrayed, then who did the betraying? Had to be his own people. Your enemies don't betray you. Your enemies enemy you, okay? To make a verb out of a noun. Something Americans have done historically, by the way, from the beginning of the country. The surging of cares had crippled him too long. The surging of cares, that is, these overwhelming cares, had crippled him, had stopped him from being able to act, right? He became a deadly burden to his own people.
I'm sorry, what line is this?
This is 905.
905, okay.
Okay? He became a deadly burden to his own people, to all noblemen. So, Hermod had become a deadly burden to his own people, to his own nation, to all the noblemen. For many a wise man had mourned in earlier times over his headstrong ways. What's headstrong?
Cocky.
Cocky, stubborn, arrogant, prideful. Okay? Who had looked to him for relief from affliction. Notice, what do this time period in 2025, what do people look to their leaders for? Relief from affliction. We want the president to lower prices, solve the problem of inflation. That's our version of dealing with dragons, okay? Or stopping World War III, whichever, is more important to you. So he goes on. Hoped that prince's son would prosper, receive his father's rank, rule his people, hoard and fortress, a kingdom of heroes, the shielding homeland. The kinsman of Helak became to all the race of mankind a more pleasant friend. So Beowulf's been praised, compared to Siegmund, and then the poet immediately, for some reason, thinks of an anti-type of the king. So Siegmund's a good kind of king. He's not literally a king, but it fits. Hrothgar's, but he's a good king too. Beowulf's been praised as someone who would be a great king. Then we get Hermod. Well, one of the reasons I think the poet is doing this is you can't really know what makes a good king until you also have a model of what is a bad king. Okay? So he throws one out there. Why is Hermod a bad king? What did he do for his people or to his people? He became a deadly burden on them. Okay? Then the poet brings us back to the kinsman of Helak. That's Beowulf. Before Beowulf fights Grendel, he tells Hrothgar, if Grendel kills me, you won't have to worry about burial because he'll eat me. But if my mail coat, my corselet remains, send that back to Helak, my king and kinsman. Okay? So, that last couple lines there, 9:13. The kinsman of Helak became to all the race of mankind a more pleasant friend. And notice, not became to the race of the Geats, to all the race of mankind, to all humanity. He became a more pleasant friend. That is, someone who is beneficial to the people. Sin possessed him. Who's the him? Hermod, not Beowulf. It's one of the things, when I used to teach Old English at the graduate level, it's one of the things that drove students absolutely mad. I don't mean angry, I mean bonkers. Trying to figure out, oftentimes, who the pronouns refer to. There's this one little entry in an annal in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and it's about this guy who raids, this king who raids another king's kingdom. Little thing. You get their names mentioned once at the beginning, and then everything after that, it's he, him, they, their, them, and it's like, who is this referring to? And you have to trace it very, very carefully from the very beginning on.
Is that an issue with translations or
Yeah, it's a huge issue for translating.
My book has a little footnote saying what the he is. Was
Yeah.
that not included in earlier editions?
Depends on who the editor is. Which edition is that? Yeah, see, because mine, which is essentially, it's the same text.
So
It doesn't have the footnotes for the pronoun references.
there's actually quite a few footnotes that are like explicitly saying like what each pronoun is supposed
Right.
to be referencing. I guess.
So, they ride back to Herod. And they see the king, fit 14. Hrothgar speaks. Even this is a one of these formulaic phrases. It's Hrothgar Mathaloda. Mathaloda is this kind of important verb that implies, gives an oration. So, he goes to the hall, he stands on the steps, he sees the steep roof plated with gold. The roof is plated with gold. Now, some critics want to say it's not literally plated with gold, that's just the color of the straw on the roof. Only problem is, straw does not stay golden color very long.
It's gonna get green.
It's gonna, and brown and then just thatchy looking. Others say, no, this is supposed to be gold to indicate Hrothgar's extreme wealth, okay? And he sees Grendel's hand. For this sight, let us swiftly offer thanks to the Almighty. Praise Jesus, okay? Much have I endured of dire grief from Grendel, but God may always work, shepherd of glory, wonder upon wonder. Again, I come back to the question I asked earlier when Hrothgar, said after Beowulf arrived and said, I'm here to kill Grendel, and he said, God could have stopped Grendel anytime he wanted, but he didn't. And after that, when Grendel starts making his way to the hall again, we had that line where we were told, Grendel Godus ira bare. He bore God's anger, his ire. And again, I suggested how you interpret the bore is really important. Is he bearing it on his person, cursed in Cain's kin? I mean, yes, he is. That part's true. And is he also carrying it to Hrothgar? Is he the manifestation of God's anger on Hrothgar? Okay? Hrothgar. It was not long ago that I did not expect ever in my life to experience relief from any of my woes. Does that make any passage that we discussed at length come to mind? It should. Those lines 175 to 88, those lines that Tolkien says are added by a Christian monk. Those lines that end with, it is woe for one who, what? Never expects any change, who must embrace the fire. And then it is well for one who, after his death day, seeks out the Father, the loving embrace. He says, it was not long ago that I did not expect ever in my life to experience relief from any of my woes. In other words, Hrothgar was already what? He was already in the fire's embrace. Okay? Wind stained with blood, this best of houses stood dripping, gory, a widespread woe to all wise men. Notice, to all wise men who did not expect that they might ever defend the people's fortress from its foes. Well, who are the wise men he's referring to?
Elders?
These are those who just before that passage that I was referring to, lines 175 to 88, these are those wise men who secretly offered sacrifices. Not like human or animals or whatever, but offerings to the slayer of souls, that he would stop this problem. Okay, think about that for a moment just logically. Why would the slayer of souls stop a monster that is providing the slayer of souls with souls. The monster's killing all these people. It's like, it's an assembly line of souls, so to speak. Okay? Anyways, now a retainer has done the very deed. Line 940. Through the might of God. Now remember, Beowulf does attribute his success to God. Now, the retainer has done the very deed through the might of God, which we all could not contrive to do with all our cleverness. Hrothgar seems to be drawing a distinction between what God is able to do and what we all can do with all of our brains and all of our plans and plottings, etc. Lo, and then we get this weird passage. I think it's weird, at least. That woman could say, whoever has born such a son into the race of men, if she still lives, that the God of old was good to her in childbearing. Who is he talking about? Beowulf's mom. That woman could say, whoever she is. Doesn't Hrothgar know who she is? I knew him being but a boy, Hrothgar says.
Not unless Beowulf's dad had multiple wives.
Nothing in the poem suggests that. In fact, nothing in the poem suggests any of the kings in the poem have multiple wives. That polygamy was not a thing at all. He says, Hrethel gave his daughter in marriage to Ecgtheow. Okay? So, why this obliqueness?
Could be dead.
Could be what?
Dead.
Dead? Could be that she's dead. What else could it be? Listen to the language again. That woman could say, whoever she was, that the God of old was good to her in childbearing. What does that sound like? God has blessed you in your birth giving.
She's got good birthing hips.
Does that what it mean? She's got good hips for producing babies?
Or just
She only produces one as far as we know. Another possible clue to what I'm kind of hinting at.
Oh, like a Mary.
This is an echo.
she's past childbearing age?
No, this is an echo of Mary.
Oh.
What was Beowulf called? He said he is a what to all humanity? A friend.
Is this comparing Beowulf to Jesus?
I think so. Okay, I could be wrong. And I'm not the only one. There are a lot of people who read this poem allegorically. I do not read it allegorically. That is where Beowulf is a stand-in for Jesus. Because I don't read it that way, because Beowulf does things Jesus, as far as we know, would never do. Like he kills a whole mess of men with his bare hands, like entire tribes of them. Okay, we're going to find out later on. He's going to swim away from a battle, from one of these Frisian raids. He's going to swim away from this. In one of the versions of this Frisian raid story, he's going to swim away with the armor of 30 men in one arm, and he's swimming in the Baltic. That means he's dog paddling while carrying this armor. If we read the poem the way it's written and not the way some people want to suggest what it really means, okay? So, he then says, now I will cherish you, Beowulf, best of men, like a son in my heart. All right? You're going to be like a son to me. Hold well henceforth your new kinship. Now, it's later suggested, not very much later, but fairly shortly, it's later suggested that this action gets interpreted by Wealhtheow, Hrothgar's wife, as Hrothgar adopting Beowulf. Okay? You'll be like a son in my heart, and then you have that hold well this new kinship. That is, you're now connected to me. It's a pretty clear, or it's a very reasonable assumption that he's intending to quote unquote adopt. Not literally. He's not going to sign the papers and, you know. So, you shall have no lack of any worldly goods which I can bestow. He said, I've often given much more for less. So, you've done such deeds that your fame will endure, 955, always and forever. May the Almighty reward you with good as he has already done. Okay? May God richly bless you, as he's already done. How's God already richly blessed them? The strength of 30 men in each hand grip. Okay? So Beowulf speaks. Freely and gladly have we fought this fight, done this deed of courage. What does he mean freely and fairly?
Bare hands.
Possibly, but I don't think so. What does freely mean?
He wasn't asked to do it.
He wasn't asked to do it? He wasn't compelled to do it? Compelled how? Did Hrothgar say, do this or you die? As if somebody's going to kill him. No. Did Hrothgar say, what did Hrothgar say?
He said that you're paying your taxes.
You owe me. That's why you're doing this. That is a subtle form of compulsion. You're doing this because you are compelled internally because you know you have a debt to pay. Beowulf is saying, no debt. I didn't know you diddly. Freely and fairly, gladly, have we fought this fight. Who's the we? Beowulf and his men. How much did they fight?
No, I mean, they fought a fair bit. They didn't do the whole thing.
They did their best.
Did they do any good? No. No.
One woke
The-
him up.
well,
They shut
except
up.
Hans, you got eaten. That gave Beowulf Grendel's MO.
I mean, if they weren't there, Beowulf might have gotten eaten sooner.
Nope.
Moral support.
Moral support. They probably after the first few started taking whacks with the swords, and the swords wouldn't even touch Grendel. They were like, "You go, Beowulf. You've got this." You know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but he's still gonna give credit to his men who came
Bingo.
brave enough.
That's the point. Beowulf is not doing what?
Taking all the glory.
I did it. I did this all. Okay? Done this deed of courage, daringly faced this unknown power. Now here's an I, would much prefer that you could have seen him decked in his finery. Literally, in his adornments, you know. What adornments? Whatever it was Grendel was wearing. We do know, we're going to find out later, Grendel carries with him. He has like a man purse, okay? It's made out of dragon skin.
Oh man.
And it's big. It's big enough to stuff a person in,
So Grendel's killed a dragon?
which gives us an idea of how big Grendel must be, okay? Apparently, or he found one, I don't know, do dragons molt, I guess?
They grow on trees.
Okay? So, he talks about the fight. I could not, line 967, the Creator did not wish it, hinder his going. I tried. Beowulf saying, I tried to keep Grendel here. God didn't allow it. I can't fight God, you know. No matter how hard I held that deadly enemy, too overwhelming was the friend's flight. He forfeited his hand, his arm, and shoulder to save his life, to guard his tracks. Just noticed something I never actually thought about. One of his discussions with the disciples, Christ says, it's better to enter death, what? Without your hand, if your hand offends you. Better to pluck out your eye and enter without, if that eye offends you. In other words, you have to lose your hand in order to save your life. He just said, Grendel lost the three things. Hand, arm, and shoulder to save his life. How long did he save it for, though? Not very. Anyway, that's an echo again. It's not an illusion. An illusion, there's a specific word or phrase that draws your mind to that specific word or phrase in whether it's the Bible or another work of classical literature. There are allusions, some think, to works of classical literature here. Okay, we're going to see one, in fact, an image outside Grendel's lair that has a parallel in the Aeneid. So he goes on. He got little comfort thereby. The loathsome destroyer will live no longer, rotten with sin, but pain has seized him, grabbed him tightly. This is line 975 in its fierce grip. There he shall abide, that is, in sin's fierce grip, guilty of his crimes, the greater judgment. He will wait. What's the greater judgment? There's two judgments. One is when you die, and the other one is when you die. The final judgment, so to speak. How the shining maker wishes to sentence him. Now that's an odd passage, because that's Beowulf, world of the poem, talking about God, the shining maker, pronouncing judgment. In Germanic mythology, there is no shining maker pronouncing judgment, so to speak. Okay? That's probably anachronistic. It's probably an anachronism that the Anglo-Saxon poet creating it isn't aware of when he puts these words in his mouth. Okay? Then we're told, the son of Ecglaf was more silent. Who's the son of Ecglaf? Remember, names alliterate. So, Unferth. Begins with a vowel. Begins with a vowel. Unferth is the son of Ecglaf. Okay? He's more quiet about his battle words, his boasting words. How quiet is he?
Silent.
He is silent. Why? Beowulf just did what he boasted he would do. Okay? Then we're told, Fit 15, Hrothgar commands for Heorot to be cleansed. They clean it inside and out. Gold-dyed tapestries are put upon the walls. And there's a new feast. Okay? Then was a set time that the son of Halfdane, that is Hrothgar, went to the hall. The king wished to share in the feast. And the poet says, I've never heard of a greater host who bore themselves better before their treasure giver. Now, a greater host could mean huge number of people. Or it could mean a host of more as in greater individuals. Like, this is the cream of the warrior crop, so to speak. All right? So look at this description we now get. Those men in their glory, they move to their benches, that is, they go to their assigned seating, and we're told, fairly, those kinsmen took many a full mead cup, stout-hearted in the high hall, Hrothgar and Hrothulf. Those are the kinsmen that are being referred to. Okay? Hrothulf is Hrothgar's nephew. All right? From Old Norse sources, we know that Hrothulf and Hrothgar did not have a peaceful relationship. Okay? My edition has the fairly lengthy footnote for the end of line 1019. Implicit in this statement, well, let me read the statement. Heorot within was filled with friends, no false treacheries did the people of the Scyldings plot at that time. Implicit in the statement is the idea that at some later time, the people of the Scyldings did plot false treacheries. From other sources, it is possible to infer that after the death of Hrothgar, his nephew Hrothulf ruled rather than Hretheric. Okay? So, you've got Hrothgar, his wife is Wealhtheow, their two sons are Hretheric, eldest, and Hrothmund. Okay? Hrothgar sits off probably to, Hrothulf sits probably off to Hrothgar's right-hand side. its position of authority and power. Okay? Unferth is still sitting down there at Hrothgar's feet, kin-slaying stench emanating from around him. Wealhtheow I have here because she's going to say some words in just a few moments, addressing both Hrothgar, Hrolf, and Beowulf, who's sitting between the two boys. These two are probably fairly young at this point. 10, 12, not old enough to reign, not old enough to wield a sword, okay? So, your footnote then goes on. Hrothulf takes the rule rather than Hrethric. Many scholars assume that the story of some sort of treacherous usurpation was known to the audience. This gives a special urgency to much of what happens. I don't really care for the footnote because I don't think the footnote's clarifying enough. The audience had to understand there was treachery involved between Hrothulf and Hrethric. Otherwise, what we're going to be told in the next several lines doesn't make any sense. Okay? And you have to understand, you have to assume that to the audience of the poem, it makes perfectly good sense. For example, there are names mentioned in this poem. There's a ton of names. We have no idea who is being referred to. But we assume an audience of the time would have understood all those names. This is one of the reasons why satire really only has a relatively short shelf life. Because you're satirizing, I'm not saying this is satire, by the way, because you're satirizing specific people and events. Reading Dante's Divine Comedy today, for example, is really difficult because Dante's got 1,000 more names probably than are in Beowulf. And the only way you know them is by reading the history, or if the edition of Dante you're using is a really good one and gives all the footnotes explaining who all these people are. But in Dante's day, they would have understood that. It's like us realizing, being familiar with names in popular culture, names in politics, names in art, films, all that kind of stuff. And somebody 500 years from now looking back and not having any of that and trying to figure out who in the world is Jimmy Fallon? Okay? Maybe even 20 or 30 years from now. So, poet goes on. He gave to Beowulf the blade of Halfdane. Okay, now who is Halfdane again? Hrothgar's father. He gives to Beowulf his father's sword. Is this significant? Yes, it is. Why?
Did he not give it to his own son?
He's not giving it to his son. Or is he?
It's a son now.
I think of you like a son in my heart, and cherish this kinship. Possibly it's the latter, okay? But that sword is an heirloom. All swords that get passed down, they're automatically heirlooms. Just like Beowulf's, war corselet, his coat of mail is, okay? And by the way, I don't think I mentioned it. Who made that coat of mail that Beowulf wears? Because Beowulf told us. Wayland. Wayland is the smithy god. Think Hephaestus in Greek, Vulcan in Rome. He's the god who makes stuff. He's literally wearing a coat of mail made by a god. Okay? That's why he says, send this back to Helak if I die. Okay? So he gives to Beowulf Halfdane's blade. He gives him a golden war standard, bright banner. He gives him a helmet, gives him a byrnie, that is, another like corselet of mail. Okay? People see all this stuff brought before him. Beowulf received the full cup in the hall. He felt no shame at that gift giving before his bowmen. And the speaker goes on and talks about he's never heard of 4 greater treasures ever dispensed on the gift and such. The crown of the helmet had a boar on it. This is a talisman. It's like a good luck charm. The man who wears that won't get his head struck off or something like that. Okay? Not literally, but figuratively. He brings in 8 horses to give. I mean, he's just emptying the hoard, so to speak. Why? Grendel is finally dead. You got to imagine. Grendel is like what for us? September 11th, 2001. And then September 12th, and the 13th, and the 14th, and the 15th for 12 freaking years. He's like, Beowulf, dude, I'm going to open Fort Knox, man. It's just, assuming Fort Knox is still Fort Knox. Okay? So we get all this treasure shown. And Fit 16. Then the Lord of Earls to each of those on the mead benches, the Lord of Earls, Hrothgar, then gives treasure to each of Beowulf's men. Also, why? Participation trophies, you know, they tried. Yes.
I was gonna say just the idea of they were brave enough to come and try and kill a thing that kills everybody.
They deserve something. You know, I'm being a little facetious with the participation trophies because it's a little bit more than, you know, hey, I showed up for the game.
I mean, I feel like Beowulf would be good off like having someone with him in case things did go awry, just to say, you know, what happened.
Yeah, they were backups, essentially. Okay? So, he then ordered gold be paid for the man that Grendel killed. That is, he paid the weregild price. So he sent treasure home to, we're going to find out his name, to Hanshu's family. Hanshu.
Sounds like the sound you make when you sleep.
Hand shoe. What is a hand shoe? What is a shoe that you put on your hand?
Glove?
A glove. The thing that Grendel carries around his shoulder, the big bag, it's spelled Glof, and it's pronounced glove. Only there, it's not a glove that you put your hand in. It's a glove that you put a man in. It's a man glove, as it were. Okay? There's some punning going on. There's elements of Anglo-Saxon humor in here. Lost largely on us. Okay? So, he said he would have done more, line 1055, if wise God and one man's courage had not permitted, the poet is telling us this. Hrothgar would have done more if wise God and one man's courage had not, Grendel would have done more. He would have killed more than just Hanshu. If wise God and one man's courage had not prevented that fate. The poet, okay, Anglo-Saxon, not within the world of the poem, says, what stopped Grendel? 2 things. Or is it? Wise God in one man's courage. I think what the poet is getting at, I could be wrong, is the idea of synergy in what it really means and not the way this word is bastardized today in politics and culture and, oh, let's act synergist. Synergy are 2 things acting in tandem with one of them not being aware that it's acting in tandem with something else. The tandem, this is Boethian. So, God up here, we're down here screwing around our lives like, you know, ants and bugs and stuff. And what we do here is working in tandem, in a line with this overarching plan, so to speak. Beowulf doesn't know that he's quote unquote, as some critics have suggested, I'm not going to say that this is necessarily what's happening, that he is necessarily bringing about God's plan. There are the allegorical critics that I suggested read the poem, well, about half of them read the poem that way, and half of them read the poem as Beowulf's going to hell because he's full of pride. We can talk about that a little bit later. So, he would have done more, Grendel, if wise God and one man's courage had not prevented that fate. Poet is still speaking. The Maker ruled all of the race of mankind as he still does. Now notice, this is the poet speaking to his Anglo-Saxon audience. What has he just told his Anglo-Saxon audience? God ruled, past tense, the race of humanity. Next half of the sentence. And he still does. Why the second half of the sentence? Almost no critics address this. Why? What would be one possible reason why the poet, the speaker of the poem, would say that, Harmon?
Perhaps because he's trying to, like, evangelize?
Okay, possibly. Do you mean evangelize, proselytize, get them into the Christian camp, so to speak? To make them Christians?
I think so. That's kind of
Okay.
where I'm going with it, but
Okay. Possibly. I like the idea of evangelize, but maybe in a kind of in a secular sense.
okay.
Nah, that's not a good way of putting it. It's not true. What else? What's another possibility?
Is it because they kept saying earlier, like, oh, like God could have killed Grendel all this time and he didn't, so they don't want to be like slandering God and being like Beowulf.
Okay,
Better.
could be. So those two are they're related in a sense. And they're kind of, I need a third point so I can triangulate the three. Get back to that point. So what was happening when God didn't stop Grendel?
He kept killing people.
He was letting people get killed.
He was letting people get killed. Are people being killed? And yet the poet is saying God is still in control. See, one of the problems with the early dating of the poem, if the poem was written, say 600 or 650 or even 700, from what we believe about the transmission of the text, the poem was then copied over a period of 200 to 300 years until it gets put in the final manuscript version we have now. What was going on in Anglo-Saxon England during that 200 to 300 years? You had Beowulf's people invading. You had the Viking invasions. Vikings were essentially what? Little human-sized Grendels. They began by attacking churches. Why? Because that's where gold was. You had gold on the plates or silver plates that were used for the Eucharist. You had gold chalices. You had gold coverings on the books of the Gospels. Okay? You had gold lampstands, gold candlesticks. Hit the churches first. Once they stopped hitting the churches and they start settling down, they start going further and further inward. And you start hitting wealthy homes, things like that, okay? What happens? You're deprived of your meat benches, your people get slaughtered, your women get raped and taken off in captivity, the whole 9 yards, okay? Why would you write this kind of poem celebrating the descendants of those people? I mean, those people doing all that rating stuff, they're the descendants of the people in this poem. Why would you write a poem celebrating that? Or why would you keep copying it? Some of us think, and I've not read many that do, I proposed this kind of idea and again was kind of thought, suggested you're crazy. Maybe this poem is a consolation for Anglo-Saxons living in a part of Anglo-Saxon England that is not under, let's say, King Alfred's rule. When King Alfred defeated Guthrum the Dane, Guthrum agreed he and his forces would live essentially north of the Thames River, north and east. Alfred would get most everything south. That's a pretty broad description. It's actually much more specific. But that area north that Guthrum and the Danes would get was called the Danelaw. It's where Danish law held sway. And you had little chiefdoms where you had Danes, Vikings, who intermarried with local Anglo-Saxons. So you had this kind of Anglo-Danish society, and you'd have these people who would set themselves up as little chiefs, little king, so to speak. But they still had to deal with raids and such. Could this be an element of the speaker of the poem saying, God ruled back then when we had real monsters to deal with, just as he does now when we have what? Maybe not Grendels. What do we have today? So many things. Monsters. We've got the Jeffrey Dahmers, we've got the Leonard Leggs, we've got the Ted Bundys, we've got the pick your serial murderer. We've got the Donald Trumps, we've got the George Bushes, we've got the Barack Obamas, the Bill Clinton. Pick your Grendel. I mean, everyone has their Grendels, okay? But the speaker is saying what? Ultimately, it's going back to that Boethian, God is in control. As he still does. Therefore, gnomic passage, understanding is always best. Spiritual foresight. What's foresight? Seeing ahead. Seeing what's in front of you, right? Because hindsight's easy. In fact, if you can't see via hindsight, you're blind. Whether physically or intellectually. Spiritual foresight. What's that foresight? He must face much, both love and hate, who long here endures this world in this wonderful life. It's not what it says. In these days of strife. What's the speaker saying?
Like, you cannot abandon faith.
You can't abandon faith, okay? You're going to endure what? Love and hate. If you live long here where? In this world of strife, the speaker is saying. Life isn't easy. No one said it was going to be. If you're going to live long, and he's kind of suggesting, that's a good. You want to live long, you don't want to die early, then what must you learn to do? You got to go with the flow. You got to take those punches, Hamlet's slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and what? Stand up to them, know when to bow, that is, know when to bend to the winds of adversity, and then stand back up. That's a little mini, M-I-N-I, like homily, tagged in there in the middle of the poem. Because then what does the poet do? Noise and music mingle together. In other words, off my soapbox, back to the world of the poem. And what are we told? The harp was touched, tales were sung, when Hrothgar's Shope was set to recite the story about the sons of Finn, surprised in ambush when the hero of the Halfdanes, Hnaf the Scylding, had to fall in a Frisian slaughter. Beowulf has just cleansed Heorot of 12 years of satanic rule. I'm kind of facetiously, but also kind of literally. And what does the poet, within the world of the poem, decide to tell a story about? To sing a song about?
Beowulf's downfall.
Nope.
A day or so.
This. It's called the Finnsburg episode. A version of this survived in a fragment of a manuscript called the Finnsburg Fragment that fairly closely follows what is in the poem. If I remember right, it's about 300 lines that survived. That manuscript portion survived until about 1710. A guy copied it down in a manuscript, and then the original was lost. Probably burned in Cotton's fire, okay? But it had been transcribed and printed. So we have a printed version, supposedly, of what it said. We don't know how accurate, etc. Okay? So the Finnsburg episode is essentially this. You have, these are the Frisians, okay? I know his name's Finn, that's because this guy, okay? These are the Frisians. These are the Danes, or half Danes, or half Schild, whatever, whichever one you want to use to call them, okay? So you have Folkwalda, the father of Finn. His name, by the way, literally, it means ruler of the folk. Folk, F-O-L-K, Walda, ruler, wielder. King is what the name means, okay? Then you have Hawk, who's the father of Hnaf and Hildebert. So, Finn and Hildebert get married. Why? Because these two tribes are at war. She is a bride piece. P-E-A-C-E. That is, she is married off to the son of the other king to try to bring peace between their two tribes. Right? We're going to hear another one of these later on in the poem. It's often thought, or it's sometimes suggested, Wealhtheow is one of these also. That she was married off by the Helming people to Hrothgar to bring peace between them. So these two get married. She goes off to live with him at Finnsburg. Burg just means fortress. Okay? So, while there, she brings troops with her. She gets her own little retinue of soldiers. Okay? And here's what we're told happens. Hildebert had no need to praise the good faith of the Jutes. It's another name for the Frisians. Guiltless, she was deprived of her dear ones in that shield play, her sons and brothers. Sent forth to their fate, dispatched by spears, she was a sad lady. Kind of a, understatement of the day. Not without cause did she mourn fate's decrees, the daughter of Hawk, after daybreak came, and she could see the slaughter of her kin, under the very skies where once she held the greatest worldly joys. What are we being told? So she goes off to live with Finn in his home, and she brings a group of soldiers with her, and apparently Finn's forces slaughter them.
Really? Why?
Feud. Why not?
I thought, but wasn't the bear supposed to end the feud, make peace between them, but just didn't pan out?
It's kind of, it's the idea, but one of the things the poem suggests is, that doesn't work, folks. Giving your daughters in marriage to try to bring peace, not a strong enough foundation for peace. So, they slaughter the Danes that are with them. She lives, okay, and we're told, line 1080, war took away all of the thanes of Finn, except a few. So, he loses forces too, so that he could not continue at all a fight with Hengist on the battlefield. Well, who is Hengist? We've not been told. Hengist is probably Hnaf's next in command. Okay? So Hnaf is her elder brother. He gets killed. He takes on the battle, so to speak. He doesn't have enough men to win. Finn doesn't have enough men to win. So, here's the hall. We essentially get this description. And they put a curtain right down the middle. Finn's forces on this side, Hengist's forces on this side for the winter.
Sounds like that.
Okay.
A lot of split the ring in half.
They're going to agree to, share food and stuff like that. Yes.
So Hengist was Hnaf's right-hand man, but Hnaf is dead.
Yes. Hnaf gets killed in the battle. Yeah. Okay. So.
He was one of the troops, or
Probably. That part's not clear. So, let me pick up. He's not dead yet. 1085, 6. So they offered them terms. That is, Finn's men offered terms to Hengist. Offered terms is essentially, we'll give you what you want to stop fighting against us. It's not surrender, but it's pretty close. Okay?
Compromise, maybe? Like a compromise?
Yeah, kind of. So here are the terms. They would clear out another hall for them, a house in High Seat, of which they should have half the control with the sons of the Jews. So this is the hall. They're going to clear out another hall. Hengist men get half. The Jutes, Frisians, Finn's men get the other half. And Folkwalda's son, with feasting and gifts, should honor the Danes each and every day. Folkwalda's son, Finn, is going to honor the Danes every day with a feast, and he's going to distribute treasure. Sucking up, all right? He'll gladden the troops of Hengist with golden rings, ancient treasures, ornamented gold, etc., etc. They swear their pledges, then on either side a firm compact of peace. And by their swearing their pledges, that's probably not just I promise, but they also give hostages. So Hengist gives some hostages to the Jutes give some hostages to Hengist. Why do you take hostages? Because if you do anything against us, we're going to kill your hostages. Nobody wants that to happen, unless they're people you don't like and are no good with a sword. That doesn't usually happen. So they swear their pledges with unfeigned zeal. Finn swore his oath to Hengist. Notice, with unfeigned. What does that mean? Genuine, real, true, honorable, trustworthy. Zeal. Finn swore to Hengist. Okay? Pledged that he, with the consent of his counselors, would support with honor those sad survivors, and that no one would break their pact in word or deed, nor through malice, blah, blah, blah. Okay? And if provoking any Frisian spoke, reminding them of all their murderous hate, then with the sword's edge they should settle it. That is, if any Frisian said anything that brought to mind the previous troubles, when the Danes were slaughtered in the hall, okay, that Frisian would be killed. The oath was made ready. Ancient gold was brought. The battle shielding's best fighting man was ready for the fire. That is Naf, because he's the leader. Ready for the fire. He's dead. So he gets put on the funeral pyre, and then Hildebert says, my son needs to be put on the fire too, because he's also dead. It's not stated directly, but the implication between this and the Finnsburg episode suggests they killed each other.
The brother and son.
The uncle and nephew
Yeah, the mother.
killed each other. Have we heard about any uncles and nephews so far? Hrothgar, Hrolf. Okay?
And also the other people, the other heroes that killed the dragon.
Yeah, Fitla and Siegmund. Fitla, nephew and son to Siegmund. So, So they build the pyre. We're told the lady sings a sad lament. Interestingly enough, the very last part of the poem, the entire poem, Beowulf, there's a lone woman singing a sad lament. So there's a clear parallel between this funeral scene and Beowulf's funeral at the end of the poem. The warrior ascended, that is, the smoke of his body ascended. Okay. Then they have the funeral mound, funeral burial, all that kind of stuff. Warriors fit 17. Warriors seek to leave to seek their native lands, the bereft of friends, to behold Frisia. Hengist will stay there with Finn, that slaughter-stained winter. So, the Frisians leave the hall and go off to their homes. Why? It's wintertime. They're preparing, go off to be with their families. Who is now staying in the hall? Finn and probably his coterie of troops, small personal bodyguard, so to speak, and Hengist and his remaining troops. Okay? Hengist, we're told, dreamt of home. But he can't go. Why? Because the waters are frozen. Okay? The Finnsburg is probably near a river, and the river has, like the Rhine or Danube, something like that, and the river has frozen. Not the Danube, would be the Rhine probably. Okay? And then when the ice starts to melt, Hengist starts to think how he might, line 1140, arrange a hostile meeting, remind the Judish sons of his iron sword. He's going to remember them, essentially, that he's a warrior. How? Revenge. How does a feud end? It always and only ever ends in one way.
Okay.
One side gets annihilated.
What about the werewolf though? Wouldn't that have been the, like, I know that he did not do that in this.
That's why. If you pay the weregild, there is no revenge. Because that's a lawful contract, so to speak.
But wouldn't that end the feud?
Yeah, yes, because that places the feud within the law. If you go outside the law, if I just killed your brother for no reason, okay, assuming you have a brother, which it sounds like you do, that opens me up to either, someone goes and gets a sheriff, you go and get a sheriff and say, Sherman killed my brother, Fred, so I now have one of two options. I pay the weregild that is determined by the legal statutes in Anglo-Saxon England, in Germanic countries, or I'm now outcast. I'm outlaw, not outcast. I'm outlaw, meaning the law no longer protects me.
So someone could come and kill you?
Yeah, and in fact, anybody could come and kill me.
Why not just cut out the middleman and just like execute you or something?
Well, I mean, probably you'd rather, as much as possible, you'd rather have weregild. At least you get something out of it, other than emotional satisfaction. Okay? So, long and short, Hengist kills Finn and all the Frisians that are in that hall. He doesn't wipe out the entire tribe. Okay, there's a reason for this. This is one of the problems with feud. Because Hengist is what? Here he's a Dane, or shielding, right? This is going to come back later. At the end of the poem, okay, the Frisians, it's going to be alluded to. The Frisians are going to attack the Geats in the future. And part of it goes back to this. Because of the feud having not been properly finished. Okay? So, long and the short, Hildebrand is then brought back to the land of the Danes by Hengist, and we're told, on their fair, line 1157, on their sea journey, they bore that noble queen back to the Danes, led her to her people. The lay was sung, the entertainer's song. It's the Gleeman's song. You know the TV show Glee, about singing chorus group? That's what Glee is, okay? The Gleeman's song, the singing man's song. Glad sounds rose again, the bench noise glittered, cup bearers gave wine from wondrous vessels. Wealth all comes forth to where the good two sat, nephew and uncle. So, Beowulf kills Grendel. They have a big party. They sing this woeful song about uncle and nephew killing each other. Wealthiel comes out bearing a cup. Two, where uncle and nephew sat together, line 1164. Their peace was still whole then. Still and then imply it won't be forever. Each true to the other. And then we get Unferth. Likewise, Unferth, spokesman, sat at the foot of the shielding Lord. Everyone trusted his spirit. Okay, the speaker here is not the person within the world of the poem. This is the the poet. Everyone trusted his spirit, that he had great courage, though to his kinsmen he had not been merciful in swordplay. In other words, he was a kinslayer. Why does the poet present us this tableau? I mean, it's like Da Vinci's Last Supper. I mean, he paints with words this picture. There's Hrothgar, there's Hrothulf, and there's Unferth. He's like Grima Wormtongue in The Lord of the Rings, sitting down there, hissing almost, who is a kinslayer. We've just heard about kinslaying. Now we have these two, and we're told their pieces holding for right now. And then there's Unferth. Unpeace, his name means. Or Marpeace.
Sounds like some unsubtle foreshadowing.
And Wealthiel says, take this cup, my noble, courteous lord, giver of treasure. She's speaking to Hrothgar. Be truly joyful. Speak to the Geats in mild words, as a man should do. Be gracious to the Geats, mindful of gifts which you now have from near and far. In other words, you got a load of treasure, give them some. But then she says, I've been told you would take this warrior, Beowulf, for your son. She hasn't heard this herself. Okay? It's been reported to her. Harold's clean, right? I mean, they got the golden tapestries hanging. The bright ring hall, use your many rewards while you can. That is, while you're still alive. Leave to your kinsmen the folk in the kingdom. Who are his kinsmen? Son 1, son 2. Leave to your children the folk, the people, in the kingdom. When you must go forth to face the Maker's decree. That is, when you die. I know that my own, and then she addresses Hrothulf. I know that my own dear gracious Hrothulf will hold and honors these youths. If you should give up the world before him, friend of the Scyldings. Friend of the Scyldings is referring to Hrothgar still. I expect that he would wish to repay both our sons kindly, if he recalls all the pleasures and honors that we have shown him in our kindness since he was a child. What is the purpose of this speech? Why does she say this specifically to Hrothulf? Why does she say, I know my own dear gracious Hrothulf will repay our sons kindly, will hold them in honor if you die before Hrothulf does. Why? Because of all the past favors we have shown to you. Why does she say that?
So he was show that he's faithful to them?
Okay. Are you saying that she is suggesting he is faithful to them?
She's saying if he survives, that he would be faithful to
Yep.
the cause of what they're doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's how most scholars read this passage.
Yeah.
I don't. I think she's being entirely facetious. So if she is being facetious, what is she really saying? Let me read it a different way. I know that my own dear, gracious Hrothulf will hold. You can tell from just that what she's saying. I don't trust him at all. Okay? She turns to the bench where her boys sat, Hrethric and Hrothmund, the sons of heroes, and the son of heroes, all the youths together with Beowulf. Okay? Then she brings, I know we've only got a minute, then she brings to Beowulf. So same scene, we don't have a change. It's right after that. She brings to Beowulf a neck ring. We would call it a torque, T-O-R-C. Okay? All kinds of these survive from a lot of them in Ireland, but there's also some in the UK and such. Okay? This is a sign of, or it's symbolic of kingship. It's symbolic of power. She brings us to him, and the speaker says, I haven't seen a greater neck ring since Hama carried off to the bright city the Brasinga necklace, which for us means what? Who the hell knows? All we know about that, you've got a little footnote. Brasinga necklace had apparently been worn by the Norse goddess Freya. Nothing's known of Hama, etc. She gives him this necklace, and that leads us to the first allusion, digression of Helak's Frisian raid, which we'll talk about on Wednesday. There is a quiz up. It's due tomorrow night. It's not long, 10 questions. It's pretty easy, I think. Just make sure you do it. And I'll put up another one that'll go from, 700 to, I'll do it so it won't be due till after Wednesday's class. Probably 700 to 15 or 1600. Looks like we're about one day behind, a little bit less maybe.